Queering Inclusive Spaces, a Métissage. What is Métissage? As arts-based research methodology, a métissage is comprised of a series of narrative writings by single authors who create a combined text by interweaving and braiding those personal writings into larger thematic pieces with the intent of transformation from the inside out. Essentially, this genre is created for a performance of collective autoethnographies around a common phenomenon, sharing stories rooted in participants' past experiences and stories of their becoming to evoke audiences to reflect upon the phenomena. The research question here is, what is inclusivity in classrooms like from CEGEP, Indigenous, and disability lenses? In the first meeting, participants worked to choose the prompt. These 4 questions were offered to participants, and collectively they decided to respond to the first one. What do inclusive classrooms look like, sound like, and feel like? The second meeting was split into 2 parts, one where participants shared the stories that they wrote in response to the initial prompt, and the second where the stories were woven together. During the sharing, participants met in a familiar location. They brought their writing in 3 different formats, and they used turn-taking to share their stories. What was interesting was the formats that were brought forward were very different. One was written as a narrative, one was organized into a chart, and one was written as a poem. After the sharing, participants worked remotely to weave. From the sharing, multiple themes were noted, and parts of the written pieces were highlighted according to these themes and coded according to these themes. Discussion after sharing brought these themes forward, and stories began to be woven together. In the final 2 meetings, participants read over the braids that were created around the themes that emerged, and they offered feedback prior to the final performance that you will hear today. The performance is brought to you by volunteer readers. Dr. Kathy Sanford is reading as an Indigenous teacher. Dr. Tim Hopper is reading as a queer grade 1 teacher, and Nabila CASJE is reading as a parent of a child with a disability. Authenticity.
Inclusion feels like being able to express things the way that is right to me.
Questions are encouraged. Participation is encouraged, but not forced or leveraged for marks.
Hard topics are addressed with care, not shied away from.
It's an ability to apologize and recognize that someone may have made an error in their words and behaviors. A cultural humility in understanding people can be wrong, including self.
Apologies are not forced. I can identify my child's contribution to the classroom community. Positive and constructive feedback is shared. My experience with and knowledge of my child is honored.
Inclusion is people-focused, not business-focused. We teach students first, not curriculum. We are not empty vessels waiting to be filled. We are whole. We are complete.
Decolonization, indigenization, resurgence.
How do we decolonize our associations of what classrooms are? When do classrooms feel inclusive? When they're led by Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers? When do they not? When they are led by ignorant, problematic, narrow-minded folks who uphold the white, heteronormative colonial patriarchy?
Everyone sees themselves and their family represented in multiple ways. Literature, posters, images.
You see your face in the pages of the texts. You hear your stories told, not just the stories of the colonizers and the oppressors.
Indigenous language and multiple languages used other than English. Territory acknowledgements, elders singing and drumming. Culture is audible.
Assumptions are minimal.
That we need to relearn the truth in an era of the TRC's calls. The system was set up to do a particular task, and now we need to understand the history behind that.
Communication and learning are reciprocal.
Emotional safety.
As I read through these notes captured from the previous meeting, I realize that I am having additional reactions and responses. How does one capture this question with a spiritual sense? I suppose it could be in the feels good or feels right. It somehow clicks, like when you know who your people are. You may feel at ease.
Children are smiling and laughing.
Spiritual is often a component that gets left out, especially by Western Eurocentric methodologies. We tend to favor the mental and the physical, but may lessen or leave out entirely the emotional and spiritual aspects as well. Ironically, and perhaps unfortunately, we had to brand it before it was considered a good teaching, social emotional learning.
Emotional safety is considered.
Inclusion is feeling safe. Your needs are honoured and respected, just as your identity is.
Undoing or perhaps relearning socializations. Don't be so emotional, and you're so overreactive tends to be a part of making spaces inclusive. People feeling free to talk about how they are feeling.
Safe. Mistakes are normalized. Learning is not quiet.
Less gendered language or none. Less microaggressions or none.
Gender-neutral language is used wherever possible.
What comments are allowed to echo in the halls? Do so-called allies speak up?
Feels not uncomfortable as an Indigenous person. No microaggressions again. Where I can feel free to talk about myself. Where I am not expected to be the expert on all things Indigenous.
Hate speech is acknowledged, never dismissed or ignored.
Inclusive spaces are colourful, but not overwhelming. Calm, so the focus is on the busy students. Names are pronounced properly, and pronouns aren't questioned, just used.
Cultural teaching of listening with 3 ears. 2 on your head and 1 in your heart.
My child is loved at school, and their contributions are honoured as they are, not what they should.
We shouldn't have to fight to exist safely in a space. Inclusion is safety. It feels like home.
Relationships.
I feel the need to write a more common phrase now that I have been a visitor on Lekwungen territory for over a decade. Natsamat, one heart, one mind. And to be true to Nchalna teachings. Hiskush ish sawak. Everything is one. It somehow clicks, like when you know who your people are.
Children know their peers and are able to identify when someone in their community is off.
Understanding that behavior is communication.
Communication and learning are reciprocal.
We teach students first, not curriculum. We are not empty vessels waiting to be filled. We are whole. We are complete.
Understanding cultural differences and being willing to learn about cultural differences.
Not all in the same boat, but in the same storm in different boats. And some don't have boats.
Spaces.
How can classrooms be reframed to be learning spaces? Learners learn everywhere, not just in the brick and mortar of a classroom. How do we decolonize our associations of what classrooms are?
Public school experiences and opportunities within the same district are not stratified by socioeconomic areas. Room is in good repair and furniture is developmentally appropriate in size.
Inclusion moves beyond the classroom, though. How do people enter the school? Can they enter the school? Is the building taken care of? If not, will the children be? Will teachers be taken care of?
Diversity on posters, inclusive language, Indigenous languages, people of color as adults and youth included, perhaps spaces that have desks and chairs if used in a variety of setups, classes that are out in community or on the land.
Adaptive technology and equipment are included in the design of the space. not as an afterthought. Decorations have a purpose and are at a height accessible for students to reference.
Inclusion is accessible for all bodies, genders, races, abilities.
Who?
When do classrooms feel inclusive? When they are led by Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers. When do they not? When they are led by ignorant, problematic, narrow-minded folks who uphold the white, heteronormative colonial patriarchy.
My experience with and knowledge of my child is honored.
Inclusion looks like us, all of us. Inclusion projects our voices rather than stifles them. Inclusion feels like home.
Accepting all as who they are. Oh great, now I have that nirvana stuck in my head. Not centering oneself.
My child is not shamed for their identity or defined by their disabilities or impairments.
Inclusion is anti-racist, anti-ableist, anti-sexist, anti-ist. Inclusion is accessible for all bodies, genders, races, abilities.
Inclusive spaces equals being inclusive of the learner and of the person, youths and adults, as one and tending to the needs of both simultaneously. Mic drop.
Choices are afforded wherever possible, not pressured to exit a French immersion program because of learning profile.
Representation of a variety of voices, race, gender identity, sexual expression, languages, ability levels, etc. Intersectional voices included.
Everyone sees themselves and their family represented in multiple ways: literature, posters, images.
You see your face in the pages of the texts. You hear your stories told, not just the stories of colonizers and oppressors.
Safe spaces as defined by the individual, not an outsider. To do the work yourself without burdening other.
Inclusion looks like us, sounds like us, feels like us. We are celebrated for who we are, not shoved back into a closet or cocoon.